Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast. I'm your host, Fred Schonenberg, and I'm so excited today to introduce you to Phil Lempert, or as he is better known, the supermarket guru. For over 25 years, Phil has been one of the most sought after thought leaders for things all around the supermarket, whether that's trends, innovations. He's been profiled and interviewed by everyone from USA Today to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NBC News' Today Show, ABC's The View to CNN. Phil's written several books, and he's working on his next book, the title of which I love. It's going to be published by John Wiley & Sons this fall, Disrupting the Food Business, Silicon Valley Culture and the Food Business. So we'll definitely put the link in the notes for you all to buy that and check it out when it goes live. But today we're going to talk about the future of the supermarket and innovation within and beyond the aisles. So please join me in welcoming Phil Lempert. Phil, it's so nice to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate it.
So we first met years ago. You were kind enough to be a judge on our California Milk Advisory Board Accelerator Program, which is now in its 6th year. And by the way, anyone listening, you can apply at realcamilkaccelerator.com. That's my only shameless plug today, I hope. But as we were getting ready for this, I was thinking back to that particular year was the COVID year, and you were remote, and we were shipping you ice cream. It feels like that was like 100 years ago.
I know the ice cream was great. Thank you, and everything. And I think that one of the important things that you've really brought to the dairy business, if you would, not just California, is really emphasizing innovation. And it's not just about, here's another brand extension, here's another flavor, here's just, another plant-based thing, but really forcing these folks to think about what's coming next and why innovation is just so important for dairy. So congratulations on 6 years. Here's to the next 60.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, it's one of the most enjoyable programs that we do, and we get to know the farmers in California. We get the processors, the buyers, the whole ecosystem, and it's a really special group of folks that are really thinking about what's coming next, and to kind of infuse that with the entrepreneurs is it's an exciting place for us to sit, and something we've enjoyed thoroughly. But for our audience, can you help level set us a little bit on your background, how you became the supermarket guru, just for anyone that might not know?
Sure. Well, let's get back to the dairy. My grandfather's a dairy farmer. So I was brought up in the business. My father is a food manufacturer and a food broker. And basically I decided to take the editorial side of things versus, in food and in supermarket versus, being the producer side. The name, the supermarket guru, was actually not coined by me. It was coined by Peter Jennings, the first time he had interviewed me on ABC World News. And he said, "Oh, you're a supermarket guru." And then, I left the next morning. I called my attorney and I said, "Do you think we could trademark this?" So that's how it came to be. And basically, growing up in the food world, as you had mentioned, working for NBC's Today Show for over 20 years as the food trends editor, and just being out there. And I always describe myself in the center of a triangle. And the 3 points of the triangle represent, brands, they represent retailers, and they represent consumers. And my job is to keep each one informed about what the needs and desires are of the other one, and just to be able to, balance all those needs.
I love that, and it's always good to not be the one that came up with your own nickname. I was explaining to my 5-year-old that you can't give yourself the nicknames. Someone's got to give that to you. So,
Right.
And Peter Jennings is a good person to give it to you.
Yes, a very classy guy.
So, can you? One of the things as we were reconnecting, I knew I wanted to have you on the show, but then I did research. And I saw your upcoming book, and Disrupting the Food Business, and Silicon Valley Culture and the Food Business. That sort of intersection. that feels like something very, core to what Venture Fuel thinks about and what I think about. So can you tell us a little bit about what the book's going to be about, why that intersection, and why you wanted to write about that?
Sure. Well, and I say this very respectfully, but the supermarket and the food industry are not very forward thinking. They are probably 5 to 10 years behind other industries, whether it's apparel or what technology, certainly. So the idea of the book came because as we started to see people investing in food companies, more venture firms out of Silicon Valley, more Silicon Valley firms getting into the food business, they have a different way of thinking. And I've interviewed a bunch of them, been to their headquarters, and seen the ups and downs in the past couple of years since I started writing the book. I started writing it before the pandemic, so obviously had to put some of the visits on hold during it. And the good and the bad news is that these new food entrepreneurs think differently. So in some cases, when we look at vertical farming, for example, I think that it's very forward thinking. I think it's great. And I think it's really brought a lot to agriculture. When we look at a lot of the plant-based products, I think just the opposite, that they've really, raised a lot of money, that they really don't understand the food business as much as they should, that they're coming out with products that consumers don't necessarily want. The whole idea of the food business for, generations was, I have a great idea, my aunt has a great recipe, I get some money from my friends or my family and I bootstrap it, versus go to the VC funds and getting, a couple $100 million and then keeping my fingers crossed that I can develop something. And I think that has taken away, especially from the plant-based products that are out there. They really don't feel it. They don't understand it. But I do see, as I said, I do see that in vertical farming, where they're really becoming much more efficient. They're really smarter. It's an improved product from a food safety standpoint, from a taste standpoint. So really being able to take a look at how they think, how it's affecting the food world, short term and long term, and what the rest of the food world can learn from them. And I think that's the important message of the book, that it's not just profiling, Ethan Brown, for example, from Beyond Meat, but really looking at the way he thinks and the way they've gone about their business and how it's going to affect supermarkets for, in the future. If you remember when these plant-based products first started coming out, the meat replacement products, we had retailers like Kroger, dedicating full sections for plant-based products. That's gone. So we really have to think about what's a trend, what's a fad, what has long-term implications.
I would love to dive into the fad versus trend piece a little bit, because a lot of large food companies, startups, VCs, of course, feel like they're chasing the latest spice, the latest diet, right? Whatever it might be, and they throw some money at it, try and ride that consumer wave, whereas others, really dig in with that consumer and try and understand if it's a long-term play. Can you talk about how you think about that sort of discrepancy between the, throw spaghetti against the wall and hope it sticks versus the really grounding in something that it has a lasting impact?
Sure. Well, Fred, you pointed out correctly exactly the way I think, and it starts with the consumer. You've got to think about the consumer. Is there a consumer need? Also, when we look at the difference between fads and trends, one of the things that I always look for is more than just one player in there that sustains this trend, if you would. The example that comes to mind right now is GLP-1 with Ozempic, with Wegovy, with all of these weight loss medications coming out. If we look at the latest CAGNY meeting down in Florida, where all the food companies get up and they present to the investment community what they're doing. I mean, ConAgra was the only one really talking about how they're reformulating foods for GLP-1 users. And while it's only estimated now that there's about 10, 12 million people on prescription GLPs, we have about another 10 million who are getting the non-prescription ones off the TV commercials. And it's estimated that, that number is going to go up to 30, 40 million people in the next couple of years. And then when it moves from an injection to a pill format, it could easily be 100 million. And we reduce the costs of that, getting away from this, about $1,000 a month down to, a couple $100 a month. We solve a lot of issues, health issues, heart disease, cancers, when we can reverse obesity, even though it's a drug. It's helpful to the population, in general. And then when we look at people like Oprah, who, gives away her steak and Weight Watchers to charity, and then really endorses the GLP-1s, that's a trend. That's not going to be a fad that goes away. And I think that what we have seen probably in the past 10 years is the allure of the food business to venture capitalists, where they, typically what they do is they say, and this much better than I, they say, okay, I'm going to make 20 deals. All I need is one that hits. Right. And, I've made $1 billion. Well, that's not necessarily the food business. The food business is very different than that. And I think that that's why we've also seen a pullback on a lot of venture funds away from food companies in the past year and a half. They're just not throwing stupid money at these things the way they used to. And if we look at the recent debacle with Foxtrot and Dom's in Chicago, with them closing after all the money, the allure of the food business is so strong. It's, food is heartfelt. We need food in order to live. And everybody wants to be part of the food business, whether it's from a taste, whether it's nutrition, for whatever reason. It's sexy to be part of the food business. Look at all the celebrities that are now getting into food and alcoholic beverages and so on. So, it's alluring to people, but that doesn't mean that they should be in our business, in my opinion. Give the money to people who actually know how to run food businesses. Don't just raise money, get into it, and then squander tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time, and then go on to your next venture.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I have a couple questions that are going to dovetail based on what you said, because for anyone that maybe isn't familiar with how VC works, there's a great book called The Power Law. And it's essentially what you just said, Phil, which is that, for every 10 bets you make, 7 or 8 are going to fail. One or two is going to be okay. And one's going to be like your home run. But that home run is going to be so big that it covers all the failures and returns the entire fund. And that's the idea. What's really difficult about the food business, as you mentioned, is it's not easy. And it takes a lot of capital and money for inventory and distribution and all the things that go into it. And so it's very hard to get that giant return in a fast amount of time. And that is the VC business, is, hey, we put it in and we want to get it back out. And we want to get it out big and fast. And they actually don't mind if you fail, as long as you fail fast.
Right.
And with the food industry, right, you want to create this groundswell. There's an unbelievable beverage out of Chicago, and we said Foxtrot, I thought of it, called Haywell. And former Miller Coors, the founders are from Miller Coors, and they just have very organically built up this passion of their fan base. And they were in Foxtrot, and they've done, they've expanded to a very impressive size at this point. But I remember talking to them and going, oh, are you raising money? Are you going faster? And they're like, no, we want to get this right. We want to get our product market fit. We want to innovate, but we want to innovate with our consumers and our customers. And that's a very smart business model and very different from what most people think of when they think of VC, right? Which is that blitz scale, like get
Yep.
big fast. How do you think about this when you look at how challenging it is to innovate, uh, either in store at a grocery or as a food company? How do you make sure that that innovation doesn't stagnate, knowing that maybe this VC influx isn't happening?
Well, if we separate it out from brands to innovate, is simpler than retailers innovating. And I think you give a perfect example of a company that really wants to do it right, wants to do it for the long haul, isn't in it just for the quick buck. And we've all met those food entrepreneurs that are in it for a quick buck, and 5 years later they're on to something else. They're building sailboats or whatever it is. So from a retail standpoint, it's much more difficult. If I take a look at Target, Target, who I think is a great retailer, who does a great job in food, their problem is that, and the reason that they don't do better in food is most of their food departments are in the back of the store. And to move the food department to the front of the store, and their new stores do have it in the front, and they do very well, to move it requires an enormous amount of money. You're looking at electric, you're looking at water lines, you're looking at refrigeration, and so on. So it's just not as doable. So you can do it with new stores, and what we continue to see is a lot of retailers evolving with their stores. Even Aldi, which has a very simple box, they're constantly evolving. And you look at those retailers who try things. Schnucks just announced that they're closing their Eat Well stores. They only had 2 Eat Well stores. It was an experiment on, focusing on a standalone store for healthy eating. And they looked at Sprouts, they looked at Fresh Market, and they said, okay, well, here's a niche. Well, they couldn't pull it off after a number of years. So at retail, it's much more difficult to innovate. And what we saw during the pandemic are retailers, again, throwing a lot of money against the wall. Obviously, a lot of them had to move into e-commerce very quickly. They weren't really prepared for it. A lot of them had to move into delivery. They partnered with Instacart, or they tried to do it themselves, or with Shipt. So it's harder. And what we're seeing now is the fallout from that. So you look at Instacart, new management, they go IPO. We finally see the numbers and see that they really haven't been making money. They've been raising a lot of money, but not making money. Now the rumor is that they're going to, because of the deal that they just made, that they're going to merge with Uber Eats. Whether or not that happens or not, who knows? But it's not a sustainable business just because you create something, especially during the pandemic. So the retailers who had to put millions of dollars in cleaning carts, putting plexiglass, just doing all the sanitation, the social distancing, even if you look at self-checkout, where they invested heavily in self-checkout, now we're seeing a pullback from consumers on self-checkout. We're seeing, a lot of theft taking place with self-checkout. So retailers are now rethinking self-checkout. So from a retail standpoint, innovation is much harder to do, and they've got to do it over a longer period of time. And a lot of it comes from new store builds. Redesigning, an old store just doesn't work. You look at Amazon, pulling Amazon Go out of their own stores, and that was supposed to be what changed the food industry. Well,
Right.
it didn't.
Are there, along those lines, are there any startups or new technologies that excite you when you look at the grocery space, whether that's on the retail side or otherwise?
Yes, I think that anything to do with personalization, whether it's on your mobile device, whether it's on a retailer's website, that takes those 50,000 SKUs down to the 1,000 that are meaningful to me.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the future. When I look at generative AI, and Woolworths in Australia now has generative AI on their website, so that I can log in and I can just say, I have one person coming over. I have 5 people coming over for dinner. One person's gluten free. One has a peanut allergy. Here's the foods that I've got in my cupboard. I want to create an Italian dinner, and I want to be able to cook it in an hour, and then it spits back in a couple seconds the recipe, my shopping list of what else I need, and I can press a button, have it delivered to me in a couple hours. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to get to, because operating a supermarket with 50,000 SKUs is not an efficient model. You can't make money on that. And, consumers are getting very frustrated. I've got a shopping list of 25 products, and I've got to walk past these 50,000 products in the store to get to them. Most retailers' websites are horrible, whether they're inaccurate information on them as it comes to health and nutrition, or even pricing. And we've got to cull this down to make it a more enjoyable shopping experience. Food should be fun. Food should be enjoyable. It should be enriching. Every time I walk into a produce department, a good produce department, I'm elated. It's aromatherapy. I've got colors. I've got fresh scents. All that. That should be our experience, whether it's online or on my mobile device, to bring back enjoyment of food. Because if we do that, we become more mindful about our choices. We become more mindful about the foods that we eat, and it's just so much better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I recently went to a really large supermarket on the West Coast with my young son, and he had so much fun running through the produce section. Right, it was misting, and there are all these things. We were touching on the tomatoes and all the things. It was just like a really fun, beautiful experience. And then we went down the next aisle, and he turned to me. He's like, "Dad, why are there so many kinds of cereal?"
Right.
And I was like, "That's a long answer. That let's just keep going."
Yeah.
Because there, every variation of anything you've ever thought of is somehow there. So let me ask you this: what do you think, if we look out into the future, say 10 years, what do you think consumers would be most surprised about today, in terms of how the supermarket experience has changed?
I think in 5 years, the supermarket is going to be half the size.
Hmm.
I think that the back half will be a micro fulfillment center that's fully robotic. And what we'll do is we'll make an appointment to go shopping, just as we do for a restaurant. So I'm going to go Wednesday at 6 p.m. to my local store. I'm going to move from that appointment to shopping online for all the boring cereals, the boring boxes, jars, cans that I buy the same thing all the time. I don't need that shopping experience. Then when I go to the store, all of those unemotional products will be waiting for me. They'll be packed up. And the entire store is just going to be fresh. It's going to be, Betty the baker. It's going to be Bob the butcher. It's going to be, Sal in the produce department. It's going to be, a beautiful dairy section. So I'm going to cut my time in half, because I don't have to walk past all that other stuff. I'm just going to be able to focus on those fresh foods that I love, that I want to choose myself. The number 1 and 2 complaints of people who order online is number 1, produce, number 2, meat. I want to pick those things out myself. I don't want somebody else to pick them for me. I want to be able to have an interchange with, again, the service personnel. I want to be able to talk to the fishmonger and say, I've never had this type of fish. How would I prepare it? If we look at seafood, seafood is great. It's affordable. It's nutritious. It's, very, very experimental, if you would, in recipes. But seafood consumption is not what it should be. We have much higher consumption of meat and turkey and chicken, and the reason is that people are afraid to prepare seafood. So I want to have that interchange at retail. I want to bond with my retailer, going back to the way our grandparents shopped for food. So I think that's what we're going to see. And for a lot of reasons, the labor shortage is going to force the store to be smaller. The robotics take care of that labor shortage and picking groceries. People are always complaining to me that they go shopping and they have, an Instacart or a shipped person in front of them having 2 or 3 shopping carts. They're blocking the aisle and they just want to shop. So we got to get rid of that congestion in the store and just make it a much better shopping experience.
I love that. It's such an idealistic way too, if it goes that route, because I mean, one of the reasons I chose the neighborhood that I live in is there's a cheese shop and there's a butcher and there's a fishmonger and there are these little tiny mom and pop type stores, and it gives such personality to the neighborhood. And there's something really lovely about that, right? And it feels nostalgic almost. And you're right. When I went to this West Coast shopping or grocery store, it was amazing. Like everybody was from Uber Eats. Everyone, the whole place, and the line was crazy. And I saw the self checkout, and pretty sure I witnessed a theft or two. And so a lot of things you're talking about make so much sense. It'll be very interesting to see what technologies enable the return to humanity of the experience. And you mentioned that sort of the back end robotics, I think is phenomenal and coming. So let me ask you this. I would be remiss if I did not ask the supermarket guru for some advice, because I'm speaking at a conference called Grocery Shop. And
Know it well.
My subject is around new products and services that are delighting health conscious shoppers. And so I wanted your advice on, is there anything from your perspective that is, a new product or service that is delighting people from a health standpoint that you think I should mention or ask my panelists about?
Sure. Well, again, I'll give you the same answer that I gave a few minutes ago about personalization.
Yeah.
I think that the more that technology can fulfill the personalization needs for people who are gluten-free or have food allergies and the like, is very important. I actually serve on the advisory board for FAIR, and one of the major concerns that not only the board but food allergy sufferers have is being able to broaden the scope of the foods that are available to them. The problem that we've got now is on packaging. There's a declaration that says this product may have been made in a factory that has soy or peanuts or sesame seeds or whatever that. It's become meaningless. There's just so many products that have that on it that it's hard for a food allergy sufferer. And there's about 35 million people with food allergies, but that represents about 100 million people because of the family that has food allergy in it. That we need to use technology to be able to broaden the scope of what they can eat. I'll never forget when I was growing up, there was a company, I don't even think it exists anymore, called Esty. And Esty was designed for people who are diabetic. And what was interesting, it had a special section in the store. And it really never did very well, except for the people who were really, really, on very strict diabetic diets, because what it did is it profiled the person who would go to that section as being ill or diabetic. And you didn't want to show people that you were diabetic. You wanted to hide that. We've got to get past that, and we've just got to make it easier for whether it's diabetic or heart disease or whatever it is to be able to choose their foods. So when we look at what those brilliant people at Grocery Shop who are always looking to the future. It's got to start with the consumer. I remember when Anil first started Grocery Shop, and I've spoken there a number of times. It was all back to what we were talking about before. It was all the far out stuff with robotics and stuff like that, and nobody ever thought about the consumer. Would the consumer use this? Is there a consumer benefit? So for your panel, probably the question that I would ask them first is, what's the consumer need that they want to solve? And then for you to be able to dig into that, is it really a consumer need? Is it a fad? Is it a trend? Back to that conversation before people just, come up with, all this money and all these ideas that go nowhere. I mean, we've seen it with a lot of the robotics in the front of the store, these goofy looking things that are rolling around the store. And I've talked to retailers who have them, and they say basically what it is, it's, a selfie moment in their store where somebody can go over and take a picture of themselves with a robot. They're really not as efficient as anybody, wants to say that they are, whether it's for scanning out of stocks or anything else. You can do that so much easier, so much simpler, without having this goofy looking thing rolling down up and down the aisles.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's very interesting to think about the ideas that are probably interesting that maybe should not have been commercialized, that then get lots of money and go to scale, and everyone kind of goes, okay, like that's cute, but not functional. I actually think what's really interesting about the personalization comment that you made is if you think of your, 5 years out, the smaller store footprint, customized, explore the store, but you have your staples packaged and prepared and ready for you when you get there. If you are gluten-free, for instance, and I can speak to that, I do not have any gluten. Most of the products I walk past, I'm not allowed to eat. Like that part of that experience is totally wasted and a little bit frustrating because I see pizza, right, that is not gluten-free, and I go, I remember those days. That was good. And I think what's interesting is if you can create that with any dietary restriction or preference, and it's ready for you, so that part is taken care of, and then it's about the exploration and the serendipity and all the things that you talked about. It's very interesting because right now, you have that balance between customer want, choice, desire, and the serendipity, and they have to do it for every individual potential customer, right? So you end up at the store with all this stuff that is not needed or wanted. So I love your prediction. I think it's really great. Phil, where should people go to learn more about all that you are doing?
Very easy. Just supermarketguru.com.
Memorable and easy. I love it. Well, we will put it in the notes, and thank you again for taking the time to share with us. I always learn so much and really enjoy our conversations.
Well, thank you, Fred, and keep up the great work. I know you have over 200 episodes, and you've done such a fabulous job with this webcast podcast in really getting the important messages to people to understand what the food business and other businesses are doing. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. And I wish you well, and hopefully we'll see you at the next California Milk event.
Would love to.